town of the good, the bad, and the weird. You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today, our movie has one iconic word, something that all Americans love.
Yeah.
Maybe why a lot of Americans love this movie, too.
I think so.
Chris, what's that word?
Freedom!
Freedom! We're finally going to Scotland again with Braveheart.
Yes. Which we picked because this is a very iconic film, but it had been a good while since I had seen it last. We also picked it because my blessed, loving husband spent a good chunk of a guy's night getting this movie and The Patriot confused, and we have left this joke running for so long that we felt we needed to cover the movie.
Yes, and speaking of, Brian is in the other room, and he can probably hear a little bit of this.
He can definitely hear us, but that's okay, because we definitely made fun of him while watching this movie at the same time.
Oh yes. So, for those who don't know, Braveheart is the 1995 wildly historically inaccurate movie about the Scottish revolutionary and his fight against English rule of Scotland.
I think this might be one of the most historically inaccurate films that is meant to be based off of actual historical events.
Yes.
As opposed to things like Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, or History of the World Part 1, soon to be Part 2.
Still haven't seen Part 1.
That's okay. We will get to it. I'm going to get to it, but at least those know, like with Abraham Lincoln, it is presumed the audience understands that vampires are not real, and that Abraham Lincoln was probably not a vampire hunter, thus this is satire.
Exactly.
With History of the World, it is well understood by both the cast and the director that, like, you're going into a comedy that is definitely not going to be real, like, probably didn't have a giant bong in ancient Greece.
You don't know.
But you don't know. Whereas this film, the reason why people get so heated is because at no point does the movie offer the, like, insight to the audience that, hey, this is going to be fantasy. This is all fake. I very loosely based this off of real events. No, there's not even like a warning at the beginning of the movie.
No.
It like starts off and is like, this happened.
And I do need to correct myself. It's Scottish Revolutionary William Wallace. I didn't say his name.
Yes, correct.
I think that is the issue with it, is since it's come out, is how historically inaccurate it is.
Yes, and like, I'm all for some historical inaccuracies and like, you know, big deal, because like history can often be very boring. You know, shortening of timelines makes sense for a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know, getting rid of some of the side characters, sure, why not? This one just pretty much negates 90% of history.
Yeah, and I will say that for everyone listening, this is our second in an unplanned for history related episode, starting with Kells.
Yes.
That
We've managed to cover the Irish and the Scottish area quite well recently. This one, I think, though, rounds it out nicely as the stupidest of the lot.
Yes. But we'll get into it. So, Braveheart is directed by Mel Gibson and written by Randall Wallace.
Yes.
It stars Mel Gibson, Catherine McCormick,
yes,
Sophie Marceau. It's French, so I butchered it.
Probably Marceau.
Patrick McGoohan. And also of note, Brendan Gleeson makes a few appearances as Hamish.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
And while we've talked about Mel Gibson as an actor in our Mad Max Thunderdome episode,
yes,
this is the first movie of his that we've covered as him as a director, so we'll talk about that a little bit.
Oh boy, do I have thoughts and opinions about that.
Well, I want to bring up that he was chosen because they couldn't figure out who else to direct it.
Yeah, that I get the sense. I get the vibe.
Yes.
And since then, I was going back through his directing credentials, because I didn't hate his acting in Mad Max. It's stupid, but, you know, Mad Max is dumb, so, like, I didn't really care. I had hive-like reactions to this man in this movie, and I had to go through and, like, try and piece the root of that, because especially my parents' age, consider him like a well-known actor and director, even though he's fairly much dropped off the radar since. Like, he's in stuff, but like I don't think our generation is like going to things for him.
No.
Like, he's not a calling card anymore.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because Tuesday's post about the poster actually talks about how much in the graphic design of the poster Mel Gibson was like front and foremost, and how much his star power was used to sell this movie.
Yes, and like there was a lot of stuff under his name in both his acting and his directing, and the atrocious number of times where it was both acting and directing, which seemed to happen more often than I think probably was necessary.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, this is his second feature film, previously having directed The Man Without a Face, which was actually a pretty good movie.
Yeah, like, it's kind of odd how violently his credentials swing from, like, a decent movie to
Apocalyptica.
Yeah, to garbage.
Yeah. As well, he uncredited for directing the TV movie Mel Gibson Goes Back to School. Which is about him going back to school to teach, or back to a school to teach theater students Hamlet.
Oh, great.
But as for Wallace, this is his first feature film writing credit, having previously done and also worked for previously he'd only done TV writing. But since this, he's done The Man in the Iron Mask.
A great one.
Pearl Harbor.
Also very good.
We Were Soldiers.
Uh-huh.
Some of those that I have a feeling are also probably inaccurate. I know Pearl Harbor is supposed to be pretty inaccurate.
It is, but it's also... It's inaccurate in like a sort of like... You kind of have to squish history to make... And like add people to make it more interesting. And not just sad and depressing.
Sounds like a trend.
Yeah. Which is kind of odd because like... I will say though that some of those... like, he definitely has the ability to base things off of better time period. So and looking through the numerous blogs and interviews that we covered to go through all this, I do think that while I'm not a huge fan of his writing style, I think a great deal of the choices of this movie land very squarely on Mr. Gibson's shoulders. And we will go into exactly where I think those happened.
I think
as we approach
it
them.
lies on both their shoulders, and I will get into that as well.
Yes.
But as for McCormack, who plays Mel Gibson's love interest, at least at the first part of the movie, she's continued acting. But the only thing I know her from is 28 Weeks Later.
Yeah, I mean, I think she did a fine job, but like her character's not in the movie a whole lot.
No,
so
it's a limited role.
It is a limited role.
Yeah. As for Marcel, she has been acting since 1980.
Look at her go.
But the only other role I know her from is Electra King in The World Is Not Enough.
Yes.
Yeah. As for Miss McGoohan, Braveheart was kind of the end of his career as he stopped acting in 2003. But he had been acting since the 50s, to be fair.
Yeah.
But I know nothing of his work other than as Judge Omar Noose in A Time to Kill.
Yeah.
And his last role was Billy Bones in Treasure Planet.
I am very familiar with Billy Bones in Treasure Planet.
Yes.
But again, like, his name has popped up with movies that I've seen, but I've never super followed him. It's kind of like in this movie where, like, he's in it. I don't have any complaints about his performance, but I also, like, am not going to seek him out specifically. Yes.
And so, while we won't get into absolutely every nook and cranny of how inaccurate this movie is...
Because, oh boy, there's many.
There is. Our sources for this episode are the commentary by director Mel Gibson.
Yeah, we made it through that.
The Writer's Journey commentary by Randall Wallace.
Yes.
Special features and interviews with cast and crew. As well as, and hear me out, my only other non-DVD source for this movie is the Encyclopedia Britannica, which
surprisingly helpful.
Surprisingly helpful in tearing this movie apart.
And I have my mother's old costuming college book that I pulled off of the shelves to really get a good look at what was supposed to be worn during this time period.
Yes. And before we get into the movie, we do have to go through a wee bit of history.
Yeah, because, this is a historical drama at its core.
Yes. So, for those who are unfamiliar with William Wallace, Wallace is a national hero of Scotland who was born in 1270 and died in August 1305. He is a primary inspiration and driving force for Scottish freedom from English rule, as we said in what the movie's about, specifically from Edward I of England.
Yes.
Who had previously imprisoned the Scottish king John de Balliol.
Sure.
Also, William Wallace was the guardian of Scotland, a kind of regent that governed Scotland around this era.
Mm-hmm.
The title existed till the end of the 14th century, and while we're not experts on the matter, we are going to bring up the history bits from time to time.
Yeah.
It's something that we can't do, but we will primarily be focusing on Braveheart from a film perspective.
Yes, which is still atrocious, don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for something that is, and like in the commentary, something that I kind of wish had been better portrayed throughout the whole movie, because I'm going to get into more the impacts of this towards the end, right? But this movie was very impactful, especially to the American audience that saw it and didn't have a ton of history knowledge behind it. So while we don't really want to talk about every detail, it is important to know that it is so wildly wrong that it poorly influenced the understanding of an entire generation of Americans.
Yes, because I have been to the statue, or I'll get into it. I've been to the statue. I've seen the swish sword.
Yeah.
And so, with the real life history out of the way, where did the idea for Braveheart come from?
Yes.
Well, writer Wallace was not aware of his ethnic connections to Scotland originally, which I didn't realize a lot of the South is somewhat connected to Scotland.
Yeah, but, it's kind of one of those ways where, like, if you try hard enough on St. Patrick's Day, everyone's Irish.
Yes, exactly. And originally he did learn about it, and when he was on vacation with his pregnant wife, he wanted to tell a story about someone from where his people and where his heritage came from.
Sure, and there's lots of great stories, and Wallace's story is very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
We, skirt around a lot of it, but it's fine.
And this is where he saw the statue of William Wallace and King Bruce, and the guard told him the story that became the start to Braveheart, and also he wanted to show this to his future children of, this is one of your ancestors.
Yes, which is exactly how a lot of, especially our parents' generation, saw and perceived Braveheart, as like a story to explain their ancestors and like where they had come, where our family had come from at some point.
Yes, yeah, no, and
so you can see why not having basic historical facts is a problem.
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who since starting streaming and before I started streaming has met a handful of Scots.
Yes.
Shout out to Ghost Axe Gaming and Scottish Bish.
Yes.
I love her stream name. I've actually learned quite a bit about Scotland here and there, which is always fun for me.
Yeah.
So, and also I do want to bring up that Wallace started his research with the Encyclopedia Britannica. Granted, probably not the online one, but still.
Yeah, no, that was the thing. Is like, if during the commentary and the interviews with him, he had seemed to not like really understand the full depth of everything, I honestly would have let a lot of the problems throughout the film slide as just like, he doesn't know, he's doing an artistic version. This is what he thought up. But no, the man proved through multiple interviews and his own commentary that he does know, in fact, the history rather well. And chose to fucking ignore it.
Great. So, before we get into it all, Chris, what are we drinking today?
Well, we need something strong to get through this.
And Scottish.
So, it started with Mick.
Macallan, 12 years.
That's it.
And I actually did look up a Scottish toast that I'm going to butcher.
Go for it. I love it.
Slava.
There we go. Delightful.
It's so good.
It is so good.
Better than Ardbeg.
Yeah, and honestly, almost too good for this movie.
We need a good palate cleanser.
We do need a good palate cleanser. An appropriate drink for this movie would have been muddy water, according to the set design. I have thoughts about that. We will get into that very soon, in fact.
So, Braveheart.
Yeah.
It opens up with a very simple title card over sweeping shots of Scotland.
It's beautiful.
It
starts off beautifully.
And I do like that Gibson said he wanted to dive right in without any real opening credits, which I think was a great start.
Oh, I agree. And it starts off with some of the most beautiful music to ever hit the screen.
Yes, it is quite lovely, and it's done by James Homer, who we have talked about, and well, maybe not talked about directly, but he's been in quite a few movies that we've talked about, namely Titanic and The Land Before Time, and also a movie that I've brought up in multiple planning sessions that we will have to get to at some point.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy, The Spirit Within.
Okay, it's not the one I thought you were going to bring up, because I thought you were going to say Avatar, but yes. Yeah, no, the composer for this music has always produced amazing work, as we know well from his long scores that we've listened to. This one in particular managed to go on to become one of the most commercially successful soundtracks of all time. Mm-hmm. Right up there with Titanic.
I listened to it while I was writing the outline.
The music is beautiful, and the scenery shots, like the flyby shots, especially at the beginning, gorgeous.
Yeah.
There are parts of this movie that are beautiful.
Yeah, I won't say anything really bad about the cinematography, because it's solid shots and...
Yeah, no, there's only a few places where I do have complaints about the cinematography. Okay. And a handful, and it's honestly not that many, especially compared to other movies we've talked about.
Oh, yeah.
There's some zooming in slow motion scenes that I have questions on why we would go that way.
Dynamic and see all the action.
Yeah, it's just... And we're going to get into this more as we talk about the different parts of this movie. I think my main gripe is that I'm not a big fan of Mel Gibson's directing style. He likes very, centered on shots. And I think a lot of the shots that I thought were the best happened to be the ones where he didn't do that.
Where you didn't see Mel Gibson?
Okay, we're going to talk about that separately, because I have a different issue there. But yes.
To be fair, he did learn from working... he even said he learned all his technique, or most of his techniques, from working on Mad Max.
Yeah, and there's a difference. Okay, so Mad Max works cinematographically because it feels like a Western.
And there's nothing really around it besides desert.
Yeah, that's true. But also, there's so much visual clutter in all of the characters and designs for Mad Max that having a centered shot of each individual character makes sense. You have a lot to look at. There's not a lot to look at in this movie.
Kilts.
We're gonna loosely call that a kilt.
Well, we'll get into that too.
We have to. It is required conversational topic.
And so we got the setting and intro of Scotland 1280, and a narrator saying that they'll tell you the story of William Wallace during the reign of Edward Longshanks, also Edward the First of England.
Yes, I like this. I like the brief intro. I like that it gives us the setting and everything. Yeah,
well, it also sets the stage for it of that this story the English will call them a liar. History is written by those who hang men is a great line.
Yeah, no, again, the opening to this is very good.
Mm-hmm. And we're immediately introduced to Malcolm Wallace and his two sons, John and William.
Yeah, interesting that he only has one brother, since, the actual guy had 3.
No, he only had 1.
No, he didn't.
Well, what I had seen, he only had 1 brother.
Well,
he was the youngest.
He definitely was. We are immediately bombarded with the appearance of the Scots.
Yes.
Who look very much like something that the Monty Python group could have created in a skit for peasants.
It's the romanticized version of...
It's not, though.
To a point. I think this helped re-bring up that Victorian romanticization of the Highland look.
I would agree with you if anyone in this movie looked like they had ever owned a bar of soap a fucking day in their life. Everyone in this film is dirty to their eyeballs. Not a single Scots person seems to have brushed their hair in their entire goddamn life. And everyone looks like they actively sit there and let rats and gerbils braid their hair.
I mean, that'd make a good Disney movie.
Yes, it would. See, okay, we have covered this. There is good precedence for the like romanticized idea of what Scots in kilts with the long, big, poofy hair could look like. Brave was a great example of that.
Brave is also set like 1,000 years before this shit.
Yeah, and look how much cleaner those fuckers were. Like, I'm not going to get into overly detail over what should have been worn, what the hair should have looked like, all of that, because this movie's honestly at this point fantasy. But I think Brave does a much better version of romanticizing what the Highland Scot people wear and look like, right?
Yeah. Fun fact, they also weren't Highlanders. We are much further south.
We are, but I don't think this stopped Mel Gibson at all.
No.
In his portrayal of any of these people.
No.
And so that is my biggest complaint with this movie, is that fucking everyone looks like homeless bikers from the 80s.
I mean, I dig the look.
It looks too much like Mad Max for me.
That's what you're upset about. It's not that you're upset that it's a romanticization, the fantasy. You're upset because it's too close to Mad Max.
Yes I am. Because, okay, if there had been more thought and detail put into the hair and costuming, I would be 100% for it. Granted, none of these people were supposed to look this way. I don't really care. If you want to put Scots people in kilts during the entire wrong period, fine. But, like, it's not, like, there's no detail to the costuming. There's no effort to put different clans into different patterns or colors.
Peasants, and also that color and pattern was romanticized by the Victorian era.
No, again, none of these people are supposed to look like this, and that's a different complaint. But if I'm ignoring the historical inaccuracy, like, why wouldn't you lean in and, like, at least give, like, identifying features to people? Why wouldn't you have it more intricate braided hair? Why wouldn't you make it so I could tell what is in people's outfits?
Because the only character we're supposed to give a shit about is Mel Gibson and William Wallace.
That is 100% true, and the man is shirtless half this movie.
Parts of it.
Yes. He spends all of his time trying to get you to, like, be in love with his knee and upper thigh.
I mean...
It's no. We're gonna... Once we get to adult version of William Wallace, I have more complaints.
Okay. So... baby little whittle William Wallace is left behind while the men go do their thing, and he stumbles upon a group of hanged men as well as a bunch of other kids also hanged, and sees it all, something that would definitely terrify him. And also, fun fact about the scene, they used real people for this shot.
Yes, they did. Why? I don't know, but I do like this shot. It has a good horror aspect, because I also forgot this movie was rated R.
Yeah.
Because I like horror films, and, like, our level of horror entry is granted skewed and a little high. So I had forgotten that this movie was considered graphic and a bit much for the general reviewer and audience.
Yeah.
Because to me, this is a fantastic opening to, like, a old-timey, like, historical horror.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I'd be so into that.
No, exactly. And I will throw my parents under the bus. On this.
Yeah.
I probably watched this around the same time I watched Alien, so...
Okay, so too young, but that's okay.
Too young. And I think I'd already been to the wax or the York Dungeon, so...
Oh, yeah, so you're good. You're ready.
Yeah, for those who don't know and haven't listened to me bring this up, the York Dungeon is a wax museum about medieval torture.
This movie is a wax museum of medieval torture as well.
And so, I mean, he's pulled away, but at night, Malcolm has a meeting, and all the nobles have been handed over and only 50 farmers left, and they're going to go fight the English.
All right, let the rebellion begin.
Dad and Bro are off to fight, and poor Wallace is left behind to throw stones and rocks at skull piles with Hamish, which...
Pretty dope.
I like this part.
I do
Nice,
too.
rough and tumble lads. It kind of it starts to show off how Wallace is different from what we think of the other Scots. He uses his brains, whereas Hamish is more bronze.
Yeah, I do like their dynamic a lot too, especially since it gets played off of a lot later.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really great way of like getting you to care about this side character, because we are about to spend a lot of time focused on just Wallace.
Yes. And it's also a good way to show that they're a little bit desensitized to skulls, pretending that they're English soldiers, but also still hiding from the English soldiers as they ride by.
Yes.
And there was also a nice shot of when he walks home. It's kind of sunny, but the dark, cloudy foreshadowing. It's kind of a weird shot, but it works.
It does. I think I would have caught on to the foreshadowing a little bit more if there were more super bright and sunny portions to this movie.
Yeah.
They did try and film almost all of this in Scotland and Ireland. A lot of it in Scotland.
No, the
battles were in Ireland.
Were they?
Yes.
Okay. I know where they filmed in Scotland. Like, it was the rainiest part of Scotland they could have filmed.
It was, and they also were there during the rainiest part of the year.
Yeah.
So there was, like, very limited daylight for them to work with. So, like, I get it. And, like, there's not much they could have done.
Mm-hmm.
But, it is a little hard to, like, catch some of these intentional dynamics when, like, Scotland themselves was like, no, it's all gray, it's all rainy.
Beautiful country, though.
It is. No, yeah.
But Wallace wakes up to tend to the farm as a group of men return with his dad and his brother's body.
So sad.
And I don't know. I don't know. Movie-wise, it has to make a sad entrance, and why Wallace is kind of the way he is. He's immediately attempts of... I do like his immediate attempt of denial where he sees it and he starts, like, walking away of, like,
yeah,
nope, this isn't happening.
No, I think all of the setup for the character works really well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fairly compelling, especially since we did have a few scenes with his interaction between his dad and him. Kind of like cementing that he got a lot of his ideals from his father. He wanted to be like him. I think it all works.
Yeah. Side little trivia, the animals used to pull the bodies are bred from their original stock of the era and are purposely kept that way for movies and showcase purposes.
Wow, fancy.
Yeah. One of the few important parts of the commentary.
Yeah, oh god. We'll talk about that separately.
Which, it's simple burial. He's faced with death at a young age, and at this funeral, Wallace seems rather ignored, but comforted by a young girl who gives him a thistle.
I do like that even the director acknowledges that they had to use a fake thistle, because this little girl just walks up and, like, snatches it.
Yes.
With her whole hand, and then hands it over. And anyone who has ever even remotely touched a thistle knows that this is going to hurt. This child can't feel her hands. No. Is what I've learned.
No, I'm well aware thistles are one of my favorite flowers.
Yes. I do like, however, that, like, the way that he chose to shoot this is one of the few scenes that I do like, because, again, we're not focused squarely on someone. Mm-hmm. This is a nice balance between the two characters and focusing in on the thistle, which is a great symbol. Mm-hmm. I wish they had brought it up more.
Yeah.
It kind of, it's pretty, like, well seen in the beginning of the movie, and then we just kind of lose it until, like, the very last second.
Yeah. No, the love story of this is very forgotten very easily, especially towards the end.
Yeah, I do wish that, like, especially with how great a parallel, like, the thistle could have been for William Wallace. Mm-hmm. I wish we would have leaned in a little bit more on, like, the pokiness and, like, the hardiness of the plant in general, but we at least touched on it, so...
Yeah.
You know, it's there.
Yeah. Also, they used a Latin because Scotland was Catholic at the time, and also they said no Gaelic because too many subtitles. Granted, to be fair, 1995, we are in a pre-Inglourious Bastards era.
That is true. Also, a great majority of the accents for this movie were inspired by Sean Connery.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Except for the actual Scots who
they found. Yeah, but they didn't give them a whole lot of lines, which is a little disappointing.
Yeah.
Because it's not even like, oh, hey, do your own research. This is the area of Scotland that we're trying to go for. Try and get your accent to sound like that. No, it sounds much more like, hey, have you heard Sean Connery speak? Sound like Sean Connery.
Have you seen Highlander?
Yes. Have you seen Highlander?
Even though Sean Connery in that movie, he's supposed to be Spanish, but he speaks like Sean Connery.
It's Sean Connery. That's just how he sounds. But yeah, everyone in this movie does sound a little bit too much like they're doing an impersonation of Sean Connery, especially once you are informed of the Sean Connery link. It's kind of hard to unhear it.
A bit.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I, of course, watched this whole thing with subtitles on. I will say, one of the only benefits to the commentaries for this movie was that the movie's subtitles were still available. So you could read the movie and hear the commentary at the same time, which I really liked. That's not normally available. But, I don't know. I feel like we could have expanded a little bit more with the dialogue here, because like we very briefly get told like, hey, William Wallace speaks several languages. Well, but also no, he doesn't. Don't worry about it.
We'll get into that. That's much later on.
Yeah. But like we could have like introduced the concept a little bit more, because we've already started with having multiple languages.
We do kind of in a second.
Okay.
So first off, Mel Gibson's dad also pointed out the Latin errors.
Yes, bless his father.
But Wallace's uncle arrives, who couldn't even be bothered to show up for the funeral for some reason.
That's very rude.
And I mean, it's a good way of showing at this point William Wallace is uneducated because he doesn't know Latin.
Yes.
And so we do have that starting of it.
We do. We do.
And at the death dreams he has are terrifying as well.
They are. I very much like them. They're very compelling.
But at night they have the pagan funeral.
Yes.
Or pagan farewell with the outlawed tune on an outlawed pipe. Way of the warrior is always brains first.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Basically, Wallace is told he's going to be trained by his uncle, who we don't even know what his uncle does, or we've known the man for like 5 seconds in this movie.
Yeah, also, like, don't get too attached to the uncle, because you don't really care about him.
This is the end, because, yeah, it's goodbye to the simple farm life.
Yeah, now he's gonna go do things.
And so, before we continue, let's do our first segment of what's wrong with this movie from the very beginning.
Oh, boy. Again, the most blaringly obvious parts.
Yes. So.
Tell me more.
Wallace's father was Sir Malcolm Wallace of Elderslie. He was a minor landowner and vassal to James V, Stuart of Scotland.
Boy, he sounds somewhat important.
As well, as far as I could tell, Sir Malcolm Wallace was not killed in battle or freedom.
No, he was not.
Or not killed in battle for freedom. England didn't invade Scotland until 1296.
That sounds about right.
As well, the bagpipes were not banned until an uprising in 1745 and were not associated with Scotland until the 1400s, though they were around in parts of Europe as early as the 13th century.
True. Also, side note, those are Irish bagpipes being played because they sound better than the Scottish ones, according to Mel Gibson.
Yes, they are called the Uilleann pipes.
Yes. So, that's not even the same.
Also of note, that, and this isn't wrong, but I think it's interesting.
Okay.
The village that everything going forward is based off of is from aerial photography of ruins and estimate of how people lived at the time.
Yes.
So cool, and also it kind of some of the architecture kind of resembles Secret of Kells.
Yeah. No, we as architects, like, we are very lucky to have a fairly broad understanding of what different places looked like around this time period, around the Middle Ages-esque time around the world. So, like, the idea of the houses being built like this, sure, I'm down for it. There's a few aspects later on that, probably not. Specifically, her window, we'll get to it. But one of the things that I do find interesting that the movie chose to go with is we know that they had roads, and they had paved roads during this time. there's not a paved anything in the entire movie.
Well,
everything is mud farmer dirty.
Yeah, because, I mean, we were way past the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s.
We are.
So, but Rome did occupy England and parts of Scotland for a little bit.
And also we learned that, like, William Wallace would have been fairly well traveled, and, like, he wasn't the only one. It's not like he's the exclusionary person in the whole of this area of Scotland who has traveled. Many a person would have gone on at least a pilgrimage or two, and would have known that roads were a thing and brought that information home with them.
Yeah. So, the reason we bring up all this, why it's wrong, is... and we originally, when we were talking about this, we were going to focus it on as a movie and not about the history.
We were trying very hard to do that.
But I had to do it because the writer mentioned he had started with the boyhood portion as a writing exercise, and the girl was to break from the flow of adults not taking responsibility. And also the fact that he knew the history was wrong.
Yeah, that is my problem as well, is like, everyone working on this, it seems, knew what the actual history was, and then chose to ignore it.
Yeah.
And not even like in the, we need to bend it or change it to fit the story.
If we shifted a year or two, we would have been fine.
Or even just, like, added some characters to, like, fill in gaps. But instead, it was a blatant, like, no, we're not even going to, like, rework or work around. We are going to ignore all facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, there'll be stops like this along the way.
There will have to be, unfortunately.
So... now we cut to the wedding of the son of Longshanks, or Edward II, in London.
Yeah. I love their portrayal of him as the skinny, scrawny little teenage kid.
Yeah, binding of powers between him and Isabella of France.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, as a kid, I never picked up on the homosexual elements of this movie.
Yeah, they're incredibly subtle, but enough people did, notice it when the movie was, like, really big and popular to write in and complain to our dear director friend.
I wouldn't doubt it. It's 95, so...
It is. A lot of people, though, weren't necessarily upset that the prince character is portrayed this way. It's a common trope, especially for this time when in movies. It is the later scene of throwing our dear friend out the window that caused a lot of stir.
I'll get into the history portion for that too, because
yes.
there's something there.
Oh, of course there is.
But the real history, he was married in 1308 when Edward II was almost 24 and Isabella of France was 12.
Yeah, that makes much more sense.
Yeah. I also love how the attitude towards France portrayed in this movie hasn't changed at all.
No, it has not.
Which I've also recently learned about the Paris syndrome phenomenon, which is fascinating.
It's one of my favorite tropes.
And as someone who never romanticized France, because, I mean, I actually probably saw Paris before I saw Scotland.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, your movie selections, but especially from a young age, managed to skirt around that trope very nicely. Whereas, like, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, this, like, romanticization of London and Paris was so ingrained in people that it was hard to get away from. Like, it was in interior decoration, it was in music, it was in fashion, it was impossible to get away from. Like, to the point of, like, if you were a girl trying to find, like, locker decorations in middle school, half of them were London or Paris. Even if you hadn't even been there.
I do vaguely remember that now.
Yeah.
Very vaguely.
It was a huge trend, but, like, a trend that set a way of thinking in stone. And this movie, 95, right in that midst.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
And also this movie kind of romanticized Scotland in its own way.
It definitely had its own impact.
Yeah, but I also like the scene because it's very much about just setting up how Longshanks or Edward I is so oppressive of the idea of bowing to anyone with power.
Yeah.
I do like the idea. The problem with or the problem with Scotland is it's full of Scots.
Yes. Like, there's a lot of good lines in there. Again, we could have just gotten rid of the whole, like, actual people names and, like, filled in our own and would have had the exact same effect.
Yep. And so, Edward I grants Prima Nocta with his strategy, which isn't a bad strategy, to breed the Scots out.
Yeah, an interesting choice, especially since there's not a lot of actual historical evidence for this.
Yeah, going for the long game.
If anything.
There are talks that there was the idea of it, but it was rarely, if ever, actually executed.
And a lot of our examples from it come from a much later Renaissance time period, and as we know, the Renaissance had a great time faking things.
Yeah. Victorian era was even worse.
Yeah, they were really bad about it, yeah. So, like, we've had to go through a couple of iterations of history to get here. However, from a storytelling device, this is very compelling. This is a good way of getting the audience riled up in favor of the Scots.
Exactly. We got a dude who's gonna take them on their wedding nights.
And this is, like, a very compelling scene from, like, how the characters react is all really, really great. I really like how the bride reacts. Like, that's very compelling, very moving. I have some, like, questions on, like, the set, or lack thereof of set.
Castle.
There's, like, a single castle in the background, and, like, there's just people frolicking in a field with, like, one wagon.
Monty Python.
Yeah, again, Brian brought up a good point when we were watching this movie, that he's like, there's a lot of elements that feel like they should have been more Hobbiton.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a really good example of, like, a way that I would love to see this movie either retold, like, the story of William Wallace retold, with more of those, like, elements, because, like, surely we can get together a, like, party tent, like, Hobbit style, if we're gonna go fake anyway.
Oh, you're talking about the wedding we're coming up to.
Yeah. Honestly, just all of it in general.
Okay.
Like, the castle feels very much like an actual castle that they weren't allowed to touch, even though it wasn't. It was a set.
Yeah, that's the thing they brought up, is, like, all this stuff they had to build.
Yeah, which, like, why wouldn't you add more details to your own set? Like, if it had been a real castle, I would have given it more, like, oh, well, they weren't allowed to hang stuff up on a historical castle. Sure. Maybe. Why not? But, like, come on, even Monty Python had more stuff in the background.
True. And so we do cut to the Scottish nobles gathering. We're introduced to Robert I, Earl of Bruce, and leading contender for the king to be King of Scotland. Women are very much property at this time.
Yeah, but, like, they don't really explain it super well.
No.
They just kind of, like, throw it in there real fast and, like, leave it.
I think you're just supposed to be under the already presumed assumption.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions meant for this movie.
Yeah. So Wallace returns to his family house in ruins, which I don't know why someone just didn't take it, or they didn't have anyone work it. I think it's just supposed to show, like, he's starting from scratch, I guess.
I don't know. Again, there's a lot of odd logic gaps here. I mean, I get that, like, the character is meant to, like, want a simple life, but why is his family home in ruins? Why not, like, pick somewhere new to live? Yeah. I don't know. It's a little strange.
Well, some woman's eyeing him, but here's the other thing, too. I do like that they went with older actors.
I do, too. Same.
Because at this time, Wallace was 27, so younger than you and I.
Yeah.
And Gibson is 39 in this movie.
Yes. Again, I don't have any complaints with, like, aging up historical characters, especially to fit, like, an actor.
Makes it also feel like times were tougher and no one was always baby faced until their 30s.
Yeah, and also on top of that, we have a problem with real history being way too young for a lot of stuff, or way too old, and a terrible clash in between. It's nice to see a middle ground, and if we're going with this is all fantasy and fake, sure, I'm all for a main character who's much older.
Yeah, because if we try and keep it accurate, I mean, getting a 2-year-old might work, because Isabella of France was 2 at this time.
Exactly.
But Wallace is stopped by Hamish throwing rocks in front of them.
Yep.
Training with stones because they won't let us train with swords. Trials of manliness, still kids at heart.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good reintroduction.
Yeah, which, by the way, this, I like this scene too because it's also re-showing that Wallace has the brains and Hamish is the brawn.
Yeah.
They haven't really changed much.
They haven't. It is a bit of an odd, proving of brain.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it happens quickly enough that it almost reads as he's just got a sharpshooting arm, as opposed to Hamish, who just can throw a big rock.
Yes, and we talked about this a little bit in our Brave episode
Mm-hmm.
of the Highland Games and how
Yes.
they were kind of popularized by the Victorians. This scene is also, it comes from that because, again, this no training with weapons or disarmament didn't happen until the 1740s and was in response to the Jacobite uprising.
Boy, that seems much later than what is current.
Oh yeah, there was so much that they just that's Scottish.
Throw it in
Braveheart.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is.
Yeah, and it's time to do some Scottish dancing. I didn't look it up. I don't know dances at all.
This is equivalent of someone having very briefly watched a river dance and gone with it. It's not correct at all. And this is also the point in the movie where we get a really good look at what the general costume of the movie
Mhm.
is. And this movie has a huge impact on kilts in America. After this movie came out, there was a huge rise in interest in it, as far as owning one, wearing one, especially for ceremonial or Renaissance fair sort of situations.
Oh, I plan to be married in a kilt.
Yeah. I hope that you don't wear it backwards, like how half of the people in this movie are.
I have a book that we got in Scotland on how to wear it.
Yeah.
So.
For a movie that impacted the American populace into really being interested in kilts, it's amazing that none of the kilts are even remotely close.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this is the reason I watched Braveheart at such a young age is because we were going to go to Scotland and my parents wanted us to see a historic movie about Scotland.
Yes. A lot of people watched this with the same mindset, and again, if this is all fantasy, that's fine. But this is fantasy in the same way that Mad Max fashion is fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But at no point was that told to anyone watching this, especially when it came out. Almost all the way up until 2010, when people really had access to the internet and were being able to talk about this movie and research themselves. So yeah, in case you are still mistakenly not understood what a kilt or a great kilt, as they call it in the movie in a couple of scenes, this is A, not a great kilt, and B, not how you wear it.
Yeah. But this gathering, I guess, is some wedding.
Sure,
and
it's hard to tell kind of what it is until you're told, because again, there's no set.
No, not at all, because the local lord shows up to flex his rights.
Yeah, sure. Which, I mean, again, a very compelling, reason for the audience to be behind the Scots. But again, set. Anything in the background, really.
Yeah. And the other thing that I don't really get about this scene is the husband now is trying to fight back.
Yes.
But the part with the new bride where she calms him, is it? I don't know if it's trying to show that women are stronger than men at times or are gonna do what they have to do.
I am so fucking glad you brought this up. This is a thing that I have noticed with movies that Mel Gibson directs, is that there is a weird dynamic between men and women in a lot of his films, where women in his films, especially in Braveheart, seem to be mostly there as love interest eye candy.
Mm-hmm.
Eye candy being the more important part here, love interest second. But still story plot driven enough to motivate the men characters. And
very old timey romance movie.
Yes, it is worth noting that in his personal life, this has bled over. And if you follow what has happened to him and how many times he has failed to keep it in his pants. I think a lot of his portrayal of women in his movies, especially Braveheart, makes more sense. Yeah. Women tend to end up being these mythical fantasy creatures in his own fantasy movies, where, like, with the power of gentleness, kindness, and love, she rules but she still has feelings. Mm-hmm. The men do not have feelings. They are strong. Their only emotion is if something happens to the fair lady creature.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's the icky vein that runs throughout the whole movie, unfortunately.
Yeah. But from here, Wallace goes to speak with Murren. Rebellious child runs off with him.
Yeah. I mean, this is a cute scene.
Yeah, which it kind of made me think. I like that you kind of... I'm glad you brought up the mysticization, because it also makes me think of, like, the stereotypical, like, fiery Scottish redhead is also kind of like the manic pixie girl.
No. This man is very into a tamed manic pixie girl. She is here for one man and one man only. And vice versa, this is a wild man who only one woman can tame.
Well, he's not even a wild man yet.
No.
Technically, 2 women tame him.
Yeah, okay, I will get to that, because I have more thoughts and opinions upon that.
Which... They're rebonding. There's growth because now it shows that William Wallace traveled on a pilgrimage. He became educated. He can fucking speak French now for some reason.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. I don't have any complaints with, like, him having gone and learned the world and, like, become educated and all that. But, like, his way of showing it feels very much like frat boy showing off to the cute girl, as opposed to, like, actually having developed these skills. It feels more of like a party trick.
Yeah.
And, like, we also, like, will eventually forget that he has learned all this, because the man never fucking uses this edumacation he went out and got.
Lies. He does use it again later on.
He does. But again, by that point, I have forgotten that he's educated. Because it's so rarely introduced in the movie.
Yeah. Which...
He mostly uses it to woo this lady.
Yeah, which right after this, he returns at night throwing rocks at her window.
Something that probably wasn't part of an actual home.
Or if it was anything, it would have been like a vent or something.
I love that they stuck really well with this. A lot of these being dug into the hillside and, like, the round shape, the stone. Mm-hmm. Her window is in the roof, and this is a time where they probably didn't have a whole lot of glass, if any. Especially not this, like, standard average day people didn't have glass for windows. So no. This girl supposedly has just a gaping hole in her bedroom.
No, it's wooden. Just remember, she opens it up and then he hits her in the head with it.
Yeah. It appears that, though, like, you can just see straight through it. It's like a screen. And it rains constantly.
Yeah.
It is raining in this girl's room. Get her an umbrella.
So no
wonder
she
wants to run away.
But yeah, it's again more bonding, and we find out
it's cute romancy shit.
He kept the flower the whole time. Yeah,
like, again, cute romancy shit. But, you know,
yeah,
it's also weird because, like, she doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of individuality going on for her. She's just kind of there to be, like, impressed by William Wallace.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Which he doesn't impress anyone else because he's called to a meeting while he's starting to start up his farm again. But he doesn't want to, but he's called out because his father was a warrior and a patriot.
Yeah.
Hint, hint, wink, wink at
yeah.
next week's episode.
Exactly. Yeah, no, this is something that's a little, like, an interesting take, because we did spend all of this time building up, like, how he romanticized the memory of his father, and he got a lot of his morals from his father, but, like, when people are like, hey, your dad would have done this, he's like, you don't know me. So far, this movie's reverse Vinland Saga. Yeah. I don't know, like, again, on paper, these are compelling, like, writing tactics, like, having his dad be this motivating factor behind him, but, like, there's not really a clear reason why he wants to farm and be simple so bad, because his dad didn't really instill that. Well, like, we don't know anything between him leaving. Yeah, no, he, like, left a child, came back a full-grown man. Yeah, who speaks French and went on a pilgrimage. Oh, and Latin. Yeah. French and Latin. And I wouldn't be surprised if he also speaks a little bit of Japanese. Like, he seems to be able to fluent in whatever's convenient.
I mean, trends in movies now. I know there's one part in King Kong where some white dude randomly speaks Japanese while holding a katana.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this feels similar.
But again, he returns throwing rocks at. Oh, sorry,
skip past that part of the romance. We're on. She's been wooed.
No. This is the part where he actually throws the rocks at when I messed up the outline.
Honestly, it's the same. The romance, whirlwind romance. 3 days, she's in love.
Yeah,
he's always been in love.
They go off secretly to get married, which a slick proposal after like 2 or 3 days that we know.
Yeah. Okay. Not gonna lie. The writing for the proposal, cute, quirky. Like, I like it.
Yeah.
I don't really understand why they run away to get married, and then she goes back to her father?
Because it's secret. Because they kind of talk about it a little bit. It's because they're trying to avoid the prima noctis.
Sure. Like, I'm all for that, but, like, this doesn't, like...
Well, he also doesn't have the father's permission, and...
Again... We've already bypassed all of those things. Like, clearly we have middle-fingered the father, because it appears we got married specifically so we can go into the really fucking cold river and fuck.
Yeah.
So, like, why is she still living with her folks? Like, why wouldn't he at least be like, hey, by the way, Dad, we are married, just in case anything happens, because this is clearly pre-birth control.
Yeah.
Like... I get, like, trying to go under the Lord's radar and not want to, like, involve any of that, but, like...
But they also don't, because they tried melding, like, Christian and pre-Christian for the ceremony.
Yeah, which, like, honestly, one of the only things that probably was somewhat historically accurate for this movie is, like, during this time period, it would have been fairly common to, like, combine the Catholic and the old pagan traditions into one, and just been like, yeah, this is how it is. This is how we do things. So, like, not mad there. Again, though, not sure why they are now married, banging in a cold river, and she lives with her folks.
Romance.
Yeah, sure.
Well, also, this is the only scene I remember being told to shield my eyes from because there are nips in it.
This is the only one?
Yeah.
Just this one?
Just this one.
Okay.
But also, I also wrote this down, but I think you covered it earlier, where there's also that weird part of her dressing him, which
yeah, no.
is kind of a weird fantasy thing of, like...
No, okay, that's... The weird fantasy thing comes across really strongly in Mel Gibson's movies when it comes to, like, the main character plus woman, especially when he's directing, less so when he's the main actor, because I don't think he has quite as much say as, like, some actors like Nicolas Cage, who really manages to put a lot of their own influence in the movie. He doesn't seem to do that as much.
No.
But yeah, ladies in his films tend to be kind of like a fantasy thing. Something that he would like.
Yeah.
Yeah, even our one, like, quote-unquote strong female character later on who...
Isabella.
Yeah, even she is kind of a weird, like, fantasy.
She's
got a male gaze going on real hard.
Yeah, she's a fantasy in the regards that the only thing she wants with her life is to get up to Mel Gibson.
Yeah, which is weird because, like...
was.
Yeah, which is weird because, like, they also are like, but she would like to be queen, but, oh, Mel Gibson's so hot.
He does it for a woman.
Yeah, it's very much like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, again...
Very weird for a 2-year-old.
He is strange for a small child who probably has a grand total of, like, 10 words.
Yes. Which, back in the village, the pair stick out like a sore thumb. They are not...
They're not subtle.
No.
For being secretly married, they're doing a terrible job.
Also, why do the guards just assume that they're married? Or is it just because they see her and it's like, yep, time to rape?
Yeah. Okay, so the movie definitely goes with choice B in like how it's portrayed. But Mel Gibson in his commentary was definitely like attempting to portray option A. Where, like, they, like, could tell that they were secretly together.
I know she's lost her virginity.
Yeah, no, that's how Mel Gibson, like, not as creepily spoken, but, like, that's definitely the imply that he put in.
No, I can tell it would be creepily spoken, at least by the guards themselves, because here's the thing with this scene. So, what makes this creepier is the guy who says, "You remind me of my daughter."
Yeah, that guy. He's creepy as hell.
He made that line up himself. That wasn't in the script.
Good on him. That's creepy as fuck. Don't get me wrong, like, from an acting standpoint, great job. The direction standpoint is a little unclear, though, because, like, just watching the movie, I'm like, yeah, okay, no problem. And then listening to the commentary and the interviews with Mel Gibson, I'm like, well, I missed something. There was supposed to be more context here that I just didn't get.
Nope, it's just like, I smell it in the air. She has fucked.
Yeah, like, that's very much like how it was portrayed in the commentary. I'm confused here.
I am too. And also, like, if they're trying to sneak around, also, like...
They're not sneaky very good.
Well, here's the thing. Wallace, every time, like, every time he's met her, it's always been about screwing now, because now it's like,
yes.
When's the next time I can see you? When are we going to go back to the woods, baby? That cold river's waiting.
Yeah, the one that they can literally see their breath in?
Yeah.
No fucking thank you.
Well, and also, how long can they hide this until she gets with child?
Yeah, no, like, again, this is not well thought out.
No.
This is a terrible fantasy. Also, we have now reached the point in the movie where Mel Gibson's character's hair has gotten to a length that it has, like, moved somehow on him. Because earlier you were like, okay, yeah, I kind of see where she's coming from. From literally this point on in the movie, he has Nick Cage face, which is no longer attractive. Even though he is meant to be increasingly more attractive as the film goes on. Like, from this point forward, he suddenly moves from being like, okay, yeah, I can see it. Not my taste, but, like, I can see how someone would be into him.
Yeah.
Clearly this gal's into him.
A lot of people were into him at this time.
Yeah. Well, from this point in the movie forward, I don't see it anymore.
I think part of it is because where Mel Gibson burnt out a little bit, too.
That is true, but I also think that, like, there is some change in either, like, how he decided to portray his emotions from here forward, or something with makeup didn't fit right from here forward. I don't know. I don't know what changed, because, again, it's all very subtle. But from here to the end of the film, he moves from the handsome rogue that, like, I get it. I get why we're in the river being cold together. To, I don't get it. Why would you risk it all?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird scene.
It is a very strange scene. But don't worry, he has come to the rescue.
Yep.
He saves his lady love, kind of, sort of.
No, it fails because Murrin is actually captured and she is killed for striking a knight of England.
Which, okay, fine. Her running away feels weak.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's all of, like, what, 6 houses in this entire town, and she can't get around one of them on a horse?
Exactly.
Like, girl, come on.
But I also like that the vassal or the mayor or whatever is like, I've been too lenient with the law. But I do also like that... So there's a couple things I do like about the scene.
Okay.
I do like that she is searching the hills constantly for Wallace in this. That is actually a good detail because
I do like it.
If he's supposed to be there to protect her, that's where she's going to look. She's not going to look towards the villagers. She's going to look to see and try and find him.
Yeah. I like it.
I also like that they kind of toned it down a little bit and made the slitting of her throat hidden.
I do too, especially because while we are supposed to be attached to her, we really don't know much about her.
She's been in the movie for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, not even that.
Yeah, not even that. She's had a handful of lines.
Yeah.
But because we aren't seeing all of it, we are more attached to her. It's similar to, like, the horror aspect of, like, not showing everything makes it scarier.
Yeah.
This makes it harder to deal with because we don't get to see it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And also I like the line, "Let this scrapper come to me."
I do too. That's very clever.
Yeah. And oh boy, does he come different ways in this movie, I guess.
Haha.
And he absolutely wrecks their shit, and it's awesome.
It is. It is very badass.
The antler to the neck and the sword throwing is so badass.
It's all so over the top and so incredibly, like, fictional that I love it.
Oh, and I love that, like, not only that, is he starts shit, and the rest of the village is like, hell yeah.
Yeah, no. I do like that, like, the actions of him and his passion are what caused the, like, uproar and the upriot, as opposed to, like, having him, like, try and give a speech or something. I like this form of, like, getting him involved. It's very efficient. It's very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Despite, like, once you look at it, his motives don't make a ton of sense, other than, like, oh, my love.
That I've been married to for a day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that that's not a reason. It just,
but,
it
like,
feels weak for what this movie becomes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's a good reason for this battle. It's a weak reason to start an entire revolution.
It feels like that, it's what we talk about in, like, JRPGs, where it's like, you do the one mission, and then at the end you fight God.
Yes, this man accidentally becomes God.
Yeah, or fights... overturns or tries to fight against the King of England.
You go out looking for a cat, you accidentally overthrow the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. But this time around, the throat slitting is brutal.
It is.
And Wallace is now the local hero. Mirren is put to rest, and it's time for reflections.
Sad day.
Waste
Everyone's
of
sad.
good whiskey.
Yeah, so sad. Ooh.
And, now McGregor, which Murren that's her dad's name. I think his name in the movie is Father McGregor or Dad McGregor, something like that.
Honestly, I could not catch half of the people in this movie's name.
Most of them don't have names, is the thing.
No, you just, like, look at them, you're like, oh yes, that dirty peasant.
Yeah. And they're there for the fun in avenging the wedding night.
Yeah. Alright.
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
Oh, sorry, McGregor's wait, is McGregor? I don't know.
I don't know. There's the father guy, and then his wife who's like, oh, it's raining.
Oh, she'll be fine. She takes after you.
Waterproof, I guess.
But it's time to go on the offensive. The sacking of the fort with wearing the English gear is pretty good. It shows
it's pretty good.
How they're talented of, like, we sent 100 men. It was more like 50.
And were they wearing this? Like, this is a really great way of, like, showing off his smarts for battle and, like, his way of, like, being the smarts over brawn while still, like, obviously he has to actually kick ass. He can't just, like, tell people what to go do.
Yeah.
So, like, this is a great way of doing that. I wish that we had, like, had more time to, like, explain his thought process a little bit more. Just so that way we could, like, highlight, like, this was his idea. He's very clever and cunning when it comes to strategy.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just, like, going around murdering people with an elk antler all the time.
Yeah. Also, the husband's revenge is great as well. Like,
I like that.
There is a good anger in his killing.
No, the actor did a fantastic job.
Yeah. And that's the thing. All the actors did fantastic jobs in this movie.
With the exception of one. The one I look at the most.
I think he did a good job.
He did a good job, but everyone else did a stellar job.
Which, burning this entire fort is a good declaration of war.
It is. I do think that this is an interesting start to a big trope that, like, wasn't really explained, but clearly, like, was thought through of, like, Wallace burns a lot of stuff in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, during the interviews and commentary, we learn why Mel Gibson decided to go with that. Part of it was that the the historical caricature that Wallace is based off of was, like, famous for potentially starting a lot of fires.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe. But also, it was just like, Mel Gibson was like, yeah, we had to build all these sets and, like, why not burn them?
I mean, that is a good reason. And before we move on, time for history.
Yeah, go on.
Wallace was unmarried, so the entire motivation behind this movie is bullshit.
Of course it is.
But he did actually burn a Lanark and killed the sheriff in 1297, and he drove the English Justiciar out of Scone.
Good for him. He did some rebellious shit.
I mean, scaring an Englishman from his breakfast pastry is...
That's terrible. How dare he? I can't imagine.
But from here we cut back to England, where the king is testing his son on what he needs to do with forcing power on him, or what he's trying to prepare him for his role, basically.
I do like that the son appears to be incredibly uninterested in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just to the point where he's like, hey, my wife, who's, I don't know, she's here. She speaks English and French fine. She'll do it.
Well, yeah, well, that's actually the earlier scene. It's right after the wedding.
Yeah.
So,
but, like, it's continuing on. It wasn't just, like, a one-time thing of, like, oh,
well,
no, she snuck her way in. No, like, it seems to be on him. Like, he seems to be the one pushing, like, trying to withdraw from his father and, like, responsibilities.
And he does, but this time not with his wife. He pushes away and convenes with his counsel and lover.
Yes.
Which, there's that line, a widow is better than being married to an Englishman.
It's a solid line.
I guess.
I mean, for a movie that famously started a small hatred for English people across, especially America, because that's who honestly watched this movie. But
yeah,
a lot of people were like, "Hey, we noticed that this movie doesn't seem to have any like good English points."
No, and I mean, to be fair, it's supposed to be from the point of the Scots, so...
It is. A lot, but, like, similar to how people were, questioning and wondering about the motives behind having, like, the one gay couple, one of them just yeeted out the window. A lot of people also question why we didn't have, like, a single good English person.
True.
And, like, from, like you said, I get it. Like, this movie's supposed to be like, no, they're the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like, this is also portrayed as like, hey, history.
What is history? It's written by movies.
It is apparently written by movies.
But England does retaliate with force. It's the nice use of bringing stones and brains back to fighting them.
Yeah.
Like that they're cornered, and it's a good use.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, this is one way to prove that, like, Wallace is smart.
Mm-hmm.
Again, wish we could have harped on it just a little bit more, because, like, character design-wise, he doesn't have a whole lot to show for it.
No, not really.
Like, there's not a whole lot of set to, like, help show that he's got strategy and smarts behind him. It's just, like, kind of him saying that he is.
And we'll explain why that is, why it doesn't show off his,
intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or why it doesn't portray his intelligence very well. Now we cut to, Bruce and his, father. And this is the start of kind of like the subplot or the secondary plot of the inner turmoil of the Scottish itself. Nobility aren't anything to legacy.
Honestly, this is like the start of like a second villain arc for the movie, and honestly, I think a better, more compelling villain arc.
Yeah, threats from the inside do definitely
also,
work better.
we see this guy more.
True.
And he has, again, good ambience, good set for like being a villain. He's like cooped up in this weird little room, albeit like Gollum-y.
Eating a bowl of peas because the English and Scottish eat peas.
With his hands, with his weird little leprosy syphilis hands.
Yeah. But there is another good line. And that's the thing, this movie does have good lines.
It does, it really does.
The uncompromising men are easy to admire, which kind of pulls back from our Euro Dreams of Sushi.
True, yeah. I mean, similar ideas, but one is much more successful and not dead.
Yeah, and also compromise is noble. Like fighting with the invisible pincer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's not a bad scene. It builds up that, hey, maybe everything's not as hunky-dory in Scotland as we think as well.
It won't be as easy a battle.
Yes. So, back in London, the prince is still unbothered.
Boy, he's just not worried, is he?
And and then this is the part where Princess Isabella is like, she's enchanted by Wallace's love, and there's like, oh, the rumor is he does it for a woman.
Yes. And, like, this is, again, the weird fantasization of all three women in this movie, one of
Mhm.
which being a side servant girl who, like, is barely in the film.
Yeah.
And, like, also this weird infatuation with the French.
Well,
And, like, how they're really into romance.
yeah, there's the line, Englishmen don't know what tongue is for.
Yeah, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
But, like, this whole movie spins partially because we only get, like, 2 examples, again, of 2 ladies who are already being portrayed as, like, wistful fantasy creatures, like, that are also obsessed with this, like, false romance.
It makes me think of, like, those really cheesy, like, paperbacks.
Yes, where it's, like, a naked, shirtless man holding a lady who's fully clothed in, like, prairie dress.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from here we cut back to the Scots, who are hiding the Highland Way, which they did hide in the forests of Selkirk, but Wallace was not a Highlander.
No, it wasn't.
Highlanders are the northern Scots, not the southern Scots like Wallace was.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Remember, he was also a knight.
Yeah, not a fucking peasant.
But the North is there to support, as well as a crazy Irishman.
I love the Irishman.
For, like, the 2 scenes you see him in as well, too.
Yeah, he seems to have, like, he turns into, like, the camp's mystical seer. Like, he seems to be high off his ass and, like, predicts slightly the future, and Wallace kinda sorta seems to believe him.
Yeah, he just goes with it. He's like, alright, cool, as long as you're on our side, man.
Yeah, and then later on, like, I foresee your death. He's like, okay, cool.
Cool.
Alright.
And doesn't he refer to Ireland as his land, but now he's banished from his land?
Yeah, they kicked him out, apparently.
And something I can actually get behind, because Ireland had been invaded in England in 1169, so...
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, why, at this point in the movie, fucking why not?
Yeah.
I don't care anymore.
Yeah, which also at this time, to make him even more crazier, he also says he talks to God, which at this time conversing with the Almighty is blasphemy.
Yeah, no, the only people allowed to do that are, like, of the church. And
Mhm.
even then, you gotta be a little higher up in the church.
Yeah. He's fun.
Yeah, I love him.
And we get a little hunting time, where I guess there's no real provisions.
I think this is mostly just, like, look at Mel Gibson and how pretty he is.
He can use a bow.
But not very well.
Well, he doesn't get to use it because they make it look like the Irishman's up to no good, but it's really the Scotsman who brought him is really the bad guy.
Sure.
It's a good scene of tension building, and it's bringing the fight of the internal struggle with the Scots to Wallace now.
I would agree that that's definitely the intent. I think the only thing it really did for me was solidify that the Irish guy is loyal to Wallace,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, is also efficient, but a strange scene.
It's a cool scene.
I mean, I guess.
I like the Irishman. I want more scenes with him.
No, I fully agree. I like the Irishman. I want more of the Irishman. I don't really care about the whole, like, again, the pacing of the hunting scene is kind of odd.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not my favorite way we did it, but, like, it's fine.
Well, and now we go to the Battle of Stirling.
Oh, yeah? Tell me more about the Battle of Stirling.
So, one, I like that they conveniently leave out that this was the Battle of Stirling Bridge.
Oh, I don't remember there being a bridge in the movie, or a river, or any form of water in this scene.
Yeah.
I'm pretty
It's,
sure this is shot on a gentle sloping hill.
Yeah. It's 3-1 forces. It was an underdog battle.
Which is cool. Like, again, that's like the premise is good.
And
we just didn't do it.
It's also a hodgepodge of Scottish weaponry against a uniform and trained group of men.
Yeah, we won't talk too much about how terribly historically inaccurate this fight is. But just be aware that, like, all of it's wrong. It's all wrong. Every part of it. Look at it in general, all wrong.
I will get into it a little bit.
Okay, good luck.
Like I said, I'm keeping it light.
Okay.
So Wallace and Co. do show up with face paint, which is iconic and awesome.
It looks real cool.
but it's not even associated with the Scots. It's something that died out about 1,000 years before the events of this movie with the Picti when they merged with the Scots after 843. Score is quite good here, though.
Yeah. Oh, no, the music's fantastic. Again, though, those would have been pre-Scottish people.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, not even the Scots.
Yeah. It just looks cool. That's all that matters about this movie. Does it look good? Does it sound good on paper? Shoot.
I read a review where one of the reviewers drew a parallel between this movie and if you were watching a film about the Civil War, where the South was dressed in modern day 3-piece suits with the suit jacket on backwards, the belt on the outside, and they were wearing Native American headdresses.
Yeah, I'll get into that in just a little bit after this battle.
Okay.
But I do like this scene because this is probably one of the best scenes of this movie and it's probably the most iconic because...
I mean, it looks cool.
Yeah, Wallace is there. He already has legends surrounding him. He can shoot fire out of his ass, apparently. Lightning out of his ass. Okay, breathe fire. Yeah. Shoot lightning out of his ass.
And he has, like, laser eyes and is 7 feet tall. Like, it's a cool scene.
So, what is a laser? Well, sir, what's a laser?
That's a better accent than what this movie had. No, I like the speech that is given here, because a lot of the time the speeches that, like, the quote-unquote mystery leader gives are honestly kind of cheesy.
Yeah.
And half the time you're like, I don't really see how this would motivate me to go jump to my death, but sure. This one, however, is pretty good. It's pretty motivating. Like, I like that we get, like, a good variety of reactions from the crowd. It's compelling.
It's also a good way to show that he's disliked by the nobles because he's doing a better job than he is, or than they are.
Yeah.
We have the fantastic speech from the acclaimed TV show Supernatural appears in this movie.
Yes.
Which, that line is still great. They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom.
Honestly, there's a lot of great lines from this movie. Like, that's one of the best parts of this movie.
Yeah. Which, I do like that the English are looking down on them, kind of like the French do in Monty Python a bit.
Yeah, we're like, silly knights.
Yeah. Which, also, it's a great scene of showing Wallace not really giving a shit. The nobility are there to make a truce. They'll take whatever they can get as long as they stay alive, but Wallace is just circling them.
Yeah.
Just hint, hint, wink, wink, reminder, Wallace was a noble himself.
Yeah, he, would have been one of them.
Yeah. But also a great idea of having him ask for the impossible to bend over and kiss their own asses.
Yeah. No, again, the scene's great if you completely ignore all of the historical facts.
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. Only some accept his blessing, and it kind of feels like, in a way, the way you describe the outfit to me also makes me feel of, like, the Uruk-hai versus the Men of Middle-earth, if the Uruk-hai were the Scots.
Yes, but also if the Uruk-hai were wearing, like, standard blazers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we get our flashing scene, which...
Hilarious.
Apparently, and I didn't do any research on this, they would have also done frontal flashing, but couldn't do that in this movie.
I mean, this movie's R-rated, but, like, only for tits and blood.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Which, also the shots of the arrows flying, the massive arrows is flying is really cool.
It is. It's a little, shaky, which is a little odd, especially because, like, we've covered so many, like, really good battle and war movies now that, like, the close-up scenes are weird, and then, like, the overall scenes of, like, the arrows raining down on them with the shields, really cool. Then the close-up of, like, the arrows flying through the air, like, a little corny.
I kind of like it, though. Like,
you do?
I do, actually. Like, it kind of adds to, like, the chaos a little bit.
Okay, alright.
Because, like, when they're in the air, it feels like you don't... Here's why I like it.
Okay.
It's because when they're flying through the air, it feels like, oh, where are they going to land? Where are they going to hit?
Okay.
And then when they come down, you're at a solid shot and you're seeing where they're actually hitting.
Okay, alright.
So I dig it to a point. Which now they start charging with the heavy cavalry. It's great tension building because
It is.
it turns out to be a slaughter because it's like, oh, we're going to raise our spears for this.
Yeah. Again, this is where I would have liked to had a little bit more backstory and like iteration for the audience to understand that like Wallace has this like military mind. He has really great strategy in place. We've shown it, but we haven't explained to anyone that like he goes into battles with a plan. We've just kind of like seen him kind of get lucky.
Yeah.
And like he has good ideas, but like we aren't really like brought through like that. Like the idea is all set up, but like it's not followed through. So like that would have really been a great like reward for building up. That would have been this moment of like, oh yeah, we did lose quite a few people to the arrows, but it was all worth it for this.
Yeah. Or if, well, I think the reason they don't do that is so that way you're kind of left on your seat and you're not following, oh, is this plan going to work? Is it going to fail? It's just like, well, shit, it's an old battlefield. Who's going to win? They're the underdogs.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah. But it turns out to be a slaughter, which also the real battle did have.
Yes.
I like that the Irishman is nuts or nothing with all this. He is just berserk.
I love him. He is probably my favorite character in this.
Yeah, which I also like that the priest is bringing out the dead or the wounded.
Yes.
They were lesser, but it was victorious. And now, should mention that there really was a bridge at the battle, and it was quite different.
Yes, it was.
For one thing, Gibson mentioned that they borrowed from half a dozen medieval battles.
Real loosely borrowed is a great term.
Yeah. No animals hurt.
That is something he was very proud of. For having as many horses as they had, he did manage to have no incidents with any of the horses.
Yeah. And also he was inspired from Kurosawa, Kubrick, and Polanski's Macbeth.
Which I kind of see.
Oh, if you've seen Kagemusha, you can see a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You probably haven't. I think the Kurosawa that I've introduced you to, it's always been like the one-on-one battles. It hasn't been like the big samurai epic wars.
They've always been more scrimmages as opposed to like, this was very like first point A and then point B.
Yeah, and that's because my interest is more kind of the post anti-samurai,
which is honestly
era.
A very good genre, so not complaining.
Yeah. But also have mentioned the Scots would have been wearing plate armor.
Yeah. Again, the costuming in this movie is just wrong.
But it looks cool. It looks cool though. That's all that matters though.
No, it does look cool. Almost all of the armor in this is wrong on both sides. Again, this was medieval-esque times, so like think more Ren Fair style than this.
Yeah.
But I mean, from a fantasy movie standpoint, it is funny to have like the butt flashing. That's good.
Also, they're not wearing heavy armor. They're up against a heavily armored force, but they still win.
Yeah, and like it is compelling to have the opposing English be more like what we recognize as a military, where everyone's wearing a uniform, same colors, they've got divisions.
Yep.
Which is not how it probably would have originally looked, but like that wouldn't register for a modern audience. So I get why we chose this.
Yeah.
Is it historically correct? No. But from a fantasy standpoint, sure, fucking why not? Why not have the men in skirts win?
I mean...
Because these are not kilts. These are skirts.
Sure. But it's time for after-battle celebrations and fighting for kingmanship amongst the Scots. They decide it's time to invade England.
There's also like one guy in the background who gets like fairly well shot up and like, but they use him again in later battles, which I like to think means that man is immortal.
I'll dig it.
There's a lot of like background people who they like continuously brought back on due to budget constraints, which if you're paying really close attention means that there's a lot of people who are just like walking around with lots of bits of arrows in them.
Generic Scotsman 12, you're gonna be reused.
Yeah.
Sorry 13, you lost the cut.
Because there's definitely like background people that they put intentionally and had die intentionally because like there's a humor to it, like the one guy being shot in the butt. That's funny.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of background guys where they didn't have enough people working on this to like not reuse a couple of people who definitely were portrayed dead earlier.
I didn't catch that at all. But at this point, Wallace also meets Robert the Bruce. They have like a kind of little bromance kind of
Yeah, I mean,
moment.
I appreciate that, like, this version of the Wallace character is like, no, Scotland does need a king, and I feel like you'd make a pretty damn good one. I have no idea why that is, but I like you.
Yeah, and like, I mean, it's one encounter, and I like that men don't follow titles; they follow courage.
There's a lot of great like speech lines in this little bit. Yeah,
but that wins his loyalty after one meeting.
Yeah, which is also confusing because like the entire character for the movie flips back and forth between his loyalties really strongly.
Mm-hmm.
But either the Wallace character doesn't know that, which later on we learn is like, oh my god, I was shocked. But like the Bruce character spends a lot of time being on the fence about where he is and what he's doing.
Which was in real life. He flip-flopped.
No. Oh, a lot, yeah. But like enough that the Wallace person would have been like, hi, Flippy Floppy. Yeah. What you doing?
But in reality, after that battle, Wallace was knighted and he became the guardian of the kingdom.
Good for him.
Which, I mean, there is some partial truth to this, as the other lords were meh about Wallace's leadership position.
I mean, it sounds like the other lords were meh about a lot of things.
Yeah, which... Now it's time to sack York. Great scene, but never happened. I remember when I was on a school trip in York in 5th grade, and they were like, oh yeah, see that gate over there? That's the one William Wallace sacked.
Yeah, which is hilarious because after this movie came out, the York and Stirling areas reported a huge boom in travel, and a lot of it was people reporting that they had seen the movie and wanted to see the places from the movie.
Yeah.
Which, again, great. If whatever gets you to travel, that's awesome and amazing. But a lot of people were traveling not knowing that, like, half of this didn't happen.
Yeah. But he did lay siege at Dundee. He left to fight the English at Stirling. But at this point, they did have the English almost driven out of Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, at least a lot of those people got to see Scotland, which is beautiful. So, good for them for traveling, I guess.
Yeah, but they also did attack Northumberland, Cumberland. They burned Alnwick, besieged Carlisle.
I don't know.
They attacked the English garrisons between the rivers at Forth and Tay. But of note, all the locations were built for the movie, as we mentioned previously. So they
yeah, you know.
And to be fair, York sounds cooler than a lot of those others.
Also, people, like, again, the main audience of this film was America.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the average 1995 American could name a whole lot of places in Scotland.
Or England.
Well, I think we could have gotten a few more places from England. You could have gotten close.
Yeah.
But Scotland and England border, I don't think a lot of people would have been able to be, like, recognizing. So at least York is, like, a big one. People would know that one. Even if it's not historically accurate again.
Yeah, but from here we're back to London as the prince tries to stand up to his father and lies.
Good for him, I guess.
Really shown him as a real fucking pansy.
Yeah, I kind of wish we had a few more scenes with the guy, because his character is very funny, as in, like, a useless, wimpy sort of way.
He's incompetent of his inheritance.
Yes.
Which, solid defenestration scene. Decapitated head as well.
I mean, it's very compelling.
Which, I love how the father just absolutely calls his son out on his shit. He's like, so how's it going in Scotland, huh?
Yeah, what you doing?
It's going fine. We're doing our due diligence. That's not what I heard. They fucking killed your cousin in York, you dipshit.
Also, I heard it all the way in France.
Which, also, by the way, the defenestration of his counsel Philip and beatdown of the prince is great.
Oh, yeah.
Most likely, Philip is based on the real-life Piers Gaveston, who was actually beheaded in 1315, and potentially had a very close relationship with Edward II that worried people, and he got exiled.
Again, like, historically accurate, who's her?
Yeah.
What's she doing here? Get out.
Yeah. Also, I do think it's funny that the king thinks that now he can buy Wallace off.
Yes, that is hilarious. Clearly wasn't paying any attention.
Yeah.
Because all Wallace wanted was a wife and a tiny little hobby farm. They burned the hobby farm and they killed his wife. So he's all out of fucks to give.
I keep trying to rework the "it lives" line. I have come here to kick ass and chew bubblegum.
And I'm all out of bubblegum. About to be out of ass.
He is out of ass already.
That is true.
But that's derogatory, but
Yeah, well.
how she's portrayed in the movie,
That
I guess.
is true.
But that night, the dead wife comes to Wallace in his dreams like some kind of elf, kind of like a weird goodbye scene.
Yeah, but also not a goodbye scene at all. Because she's like, you must do what is right. And it's like, cool, where have you been this whole fucking time? Thought you were the main reason this man was at war.
She's been dead. She's been dead and buried this whole time.
Yeah, which, granted, a good reason to not show up to something, but you can't just then suddenly show up and be like, I heard you needed more motivation. Woo!
I'm a spooky ghost.
But she's not a spooky ghost. She's a sexy ghost.
I've seen a few of those feature films.
I have too, for this movie. She's not a spooky ghost. Scotland has plenty of good spooky ghosts and, like, haunting figures that they could have used as, like, ooh, ghost. No, this is just, like, the image of his long dead wife that he loved so much for 3 days.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
But it's time to speak to Princess Isabella. Two very conflicting point of views, which...
I mean, kind of...
It's some dumb moment because the Queen's like, you attacked helpless people in York, and he's like, well, what about all my helpless people that the English have done? And she's like, oh no, the English have been the baddies.
Okay, that is where I'm also confused because they portray her in this, like, competent light. Like, they give her, like, oh, come learn how to be the queen. Like, they aren't shying away in the movie from having her be the full-on ruler. Like, everyone seems pretty confident that the king prince is useless little fuck, and we're gonna just ignore him. We're gonna lock him in a tower someday and just leave him there. And you're going to rule. Great. Love it. She cannot be that stupid to then be shocked and surprised that the English have been murdering people. Because because again, remember, she's not even English.
Yeah.
She is a brought-in, married by force princess.
She is French. The French hated the English. I think they still probably do to some point. The English hated the French.
Especially during this time period. Like, there is no way on God's green earth that she would be stupid enough to be like, no, we've never heard a fly.
Her language skills are impressive for a 2-year-old.
Yeah, I think at this point she's 3, thank you.
Might be. She might have been 2 or 3 around this time.
Again, though, she's doing really good for a 3-year-old.
But it's also that stupid moment where, like, she tries to speak to her counsel in French, and he responds in French, and they're like, oh shit, we can't talk bad around him.
Yeah, this is another part that, like, I understand what the writing was supposed to be doing of, like, showing that he is also educated and this great mind and, like, a good leader material, right? Which is fine, but we barely touched on this earlier. Like, way back, we've all forgotten that the man is, like, has an education, right? We've all forgotten that.
Yeah.
We've also not really been, like, handed out that, like, he has any, like, strategy or military training or knowledge in the art of war.
Yeah.
He just seems to be, like, this guy who's gotten real lucky and has some, like, cheeky ideas. Mostly showing his butt cheeks during battle.
Yeah. Cheeky.
Yeah. Hilarious. And he's going up against this, like, queen who has been taught how to be the ruler. And she is... instantly, because he speaks French, like, A, wooed by him, and B, outdone. She cannot compete. He wins.
There's a line in The Patriot where he says, he called me a cheeky fella. But I do like that it shows his defiance of, like, he can't be bought out. Yeah. Again, a man of principle.
Again, the idea is all there, and I like it. I just feel like it's very... lightly done.
Yeah.
Like, we could have gone deeper.
Offering peace that he doesn't need. He wants problems always.
Yeah.
And I I think this interaction between him and the princess is kind of dumb. There's an exchange of lines that I don't really care for, where it's like, I know about your woman. She was my wife!
He says as he ogles her.
Yes.
Like, sir, get your priorities straight.
Yeah.
You can't go to war over a woman and then ogle your enemy's wife.
Yeah.
This is weird. This is, especially for a 3-year-old.
But we return to England. They're going to be standing their ground. Peace was never an option.
Of course, why are any of us surprised?
Yeah, back in York, internal fighting continues as more troops arrive, and Wallace is uncompromising, and he's not going to give up. He'll keep fighting to the end.
Even if it's just him by himself.
Yes. And now it is time for the Battle of Falkirk.
Hooray!
Not looking good, because Edward I is here now.
Yeah.
They oiled the field early.
I do like how during the commentary Mel Gibson was like, yeah, we throw this magic black stuff everywhere and that's really flammable. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure they had something flammable back then.
Again, if it looks cool. It's like what we're taught in like when we're in architecture school, and they're like, well, what purpose does it have? It looks cool. That's not a good enough purpose. Your client's not going to appreciate that. Where that's all we deal with is what our client think looks cool or good. Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, I'm sorry, sir, you need more room for air ducts.
Yeah. But nobility is a bunch of dickheads. They abandon.
Of course.
Falling to power. Life is cheap for the English. That they pull a very Farquaad. Some of you may die, but that's a chance I'm willing to take.
Yes. I do like that this is like a good way of showing the English leaders' brutality to their own people. Again, surface level wise, sure, why not? I do think that a lot of the battle is a little hard to follow at times.
Yeah, it's more chaotic than the last one. I think that works in his favor though, because ultimately it is a solid smackdown for the Scottish.
True.
And also, I think that chaos just adds to the fact that now even more so without the nobility backing them, Wallace isn't capable of leading the Scots.
Okay, all right, yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah,
sure.
Especially up against King Edward I.
That is true. That is true.
Which in all this, Robert the Bruce is to the rescue of Wallace. Battle's lost, and so is hope.
Oh, no.
Robert the Bruce realizes his fault in trying to follow the nobility, which...
But it's too late, because his weird syphilis leprosy father doesn't care.
Yeah, and now the other nobility have to deal with the betrayal of Wallace as he takes his revenge, and now he's making an enemy of the Scots as well.
Yeah, the man just seems to be here to fight anyone.
Yeah. Which Gibson mentioned this battle was more about the politics, and it's just like,
sure.
The hell are you talking about, man? Like, what is this like?
This movie's idea of like portraying politics is so and so punched this other guy, so thus politics.
Yeah, or hey, they had a little squabble for 3 minutes. Time to move on. There's no like interchanging, like moving of like metaphorical chess pieces across this board of a movie.
No, for a movie that was meant to like again be this very like war strategy based like concept, like again, chess is a good example. It seems to be more like punch checkers, where you move a checker piece and then punch your opponent, and then they move a checker piece and punch you.
You know, that would actually be probably interesting.
I'm sure that's a game that the front of Cracker Barrel will soon be introducing.
I mean, I recently, at my brother's bachelor party, I learned about card jutsu.
Oh, yeah. Well, similar concept.
Yeah, for those who don't know, it's jujutsu in a car, and it looks like the act of a serial killer movie. And, like, the one bout we were watching, he was choking the dude with the seatbelt, and the commentator is like, this seems like a scene from a serial killer movie.
Yes. This is, again, this entire movie feels a lot like how children play slug bug in a car.
Yeah.
Where, like, there should be thought and strategy behind it, especially since the children are the ones driving the cars. But there's not any strategy, really, only just punching.
Yeah.
But there's meant to be strategy. But we're not told anything about the strategy of the slug bug game.
Yeah.
So there's just beating up.
And so, time for another history break.
Yes, tell me more.
So the Battle of Falkirk misses the river.
Oh, yeah?
But semi-includes the burning of the land to slow down Edward advances before this battle.
Oh, well, that's not what happened in the movie.
No.
In the movie, he sets fire to the land.
It was at a small river. The English had a hard time crossing the river in grounds. And so Wallace...
Because much like vampires, they can't cross moving water?
No, the horses had a hard time with water.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll see more about horses and water later in this film.
They did well against the horses, but the arrows got them.
Oh, goddamn them arrows. They're so pointy.
And then more horsemen charged.
Oh, that is a problem.
And after this, I'm going to precursor what's going to happen. Wallace resigned his role of Guardian of Scotland in December 1299.
Are you telling me that the real Wallace gave up?
No, kind of. Okay, so after this, there's the potential he went to France in 1299.
I hope he
and
retired.
He returned as a guerrilla leader, but he disappeared from history from 1299 to his arrest in 1305.
I fucking love an important historical figure that just disappears.
Well, like he's that's the thing, like he's important, but like when you look at the grand scheme of things, he's just like the spark plug.
Oh yeah. No, those are my favorite sort of people where like nothing super big changes because they disappeared, but the intrigue.
Yeah.
Did they Bermuda Triangle themselves? Did they just have a great holiday in the Alps?
Records probably weren't just really kept very well.
Was he just at home and no one bothered to check? Like,
our previous leader of our country for a year has gone missing.
We don't care. We're busy punching each other.
Yeah. But now Wallace in the movie is also a folk legend, but he's got enemies on both sides.
Of course he does, because he keeps punching people.
Yeah, time to use the princess as a tool.
Why not? You know,
making everything just more. I mean, also makes the king a little bit more despicable.
Yeah. Say.
Wallace is right to sniff out the ambush that he uses the black tar to burn English soldiers in again, much like how they killed his family.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm all for setting shit on fire for a movie. Looks really cool. Do kind of wish that they'd been a little bit more upfront with, like, the reason why we chose to burn a lot of people and things was because we liked it.
Yeah.
Like, just say you liked doing it, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's just dumb.
It is.
But now it's time for the princess to meet Wallace, where they're both now smitten with each other, and...
But also, they, like, aren't. She, like, shows up and is like, time to meet this mysterious man. And he's like, you smell delightful. We should get together.
Yeah, he's over his wife now because he's offered sex in a tent over sex next to a cold river.
Oh boy! But also, like, if the rest of the movie was him being like, alright, I am over my dead wife, we never talk about the dead wife again, I would believe it. But we don't, do we? We come back to dead wife.
Very briefly.
But importantly, we come back to fucking dead wife, which is weird because now this gal is not just, like, smitten with him, but head over heels ready to, like, ruin the kingdom for this man.
Yeah.
What cologne is he wearing?
Dirt.
Yeah, actually. Again, throughout the movie, it doesn't look like he bathes once, and he is constantly covered in tar, mud, blood, other people's guts, and he is just dirtier and dirtier throughout the film.
Also...
I don't get it. I don't get the appeal.
Back to fucking dead wife sounds like a bad name for a necrophilia porno.
Yeah.
Back to fucking dead wife.
All set in the 1950s.
I mean, it happens in zombie movies, so...
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why morgues prefer to hire women.
I've heard tales of the same thing happening.
Yeah, back to fucking dead wife.
Speaking of death, the leprosy's 7th Robert the Bruce dies.
Yes. Oh boy, does he look delightfully crusty.
Oh yeah.
For a movie that makeup wise didn't really give a shit throughout the whole thing, he looks good.
He does.
He is very and his progression with the disease throughout the film, mwah, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
About best makeup in the whole thing.
Yeah, which one thing they got right is he did potentially die of leprosy, but it could have also been a stroke. And his death is unclear.
Yeah, and also, it was the Middle Ages. The man could have breathed in wrong and died. So, I don't know. Everyone died all the time back then.
Yeah, pretty much. And now it's time for Scott's meeting with Wallace, trying to bring the Scots together, changing plans and pleading with the nobles.
Again, this all would have been much more politically motivating, and, I would have been more invested if we had shown Wallace as having any, real political genius or, motive at all.
Yeah, or even a bond, because, in this scene, his loyal subjects turn around on him, Hamish punches him, the others just kind of walk off. It's
Hamish punching him also doesn't make a ton of sense, because we have seen that Hamish punches him regularly, and then immediately, high-fives him for punching him.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is, there's no kinship brought up in this entire movie. It's all just...
No.
Wallace.
Yeah, and it feels like they for a group that I would be down for them abandoning him for the nobles or the armies that hadn't really been with him.
Mm-hmm.
But half of these guys apparently have been fighting with him the whole time. And they're just all of a sudden I don't know, I don't feel like it anymore.
Yeah, and where's the sudden change of heart? Because I know he's promised he's going to the Scottish nobles, not the English nobles.
Sure, but again, the politics hadn't seemed to been that very important until now.
Did Isabella use some kind of French vagina magic on him and hey, it's not so bad?
Yeah, no, unclear. Mystery.
I don't know. It's a way to bring up his capture, because he arrives
this is the weakest capture of all fucking time.
Immediately betrayed.
He walks in and is I smell a trap. Oh, god damn it.
But he could always sniff out the traps before.
Yeah, this is the stupidest trap I've ever seen in my whole goddamn life. But why not?
Yeah, which, like we mentioned, Robert the Bruce did flip-flop sides, but he was never directly involved in Wallace's betrayal.
No. And also, I'm sure this is not how he was captured.
I don't know.
He didn't walk into the fort and they go, haha, gotcha.
He was captured outside a city. There's nothing dramatic that's at least written about his capture.
No, there wasn't a man with a basket sneaking up on him.
Remember, this man disappeared for 6 years before his capture.
Yeah. Honestly, his capture was probably hey, isn't that Wallace? Weren't we supposed to get him?
Yeah, so Wallace is now on trial, and
yeah, honestly, this is all an excuse to show off how good Mel Gibson supposedly looks in shackles.
Actually, this is one of the more factual parts of the film.
True.
Because he was put on trial as a traitor, which he never considered himself a traitor, as he's never swore an oath to England.
He's not wrong.
No.
England says that he's wrong, but he's not technically wrong.
Again, the story will be rewritten by those who hang men like Wallace.
Unless it's this movie. And then it's fuck all.
Yeah. Which the Queen visits to try and sway him for a quick death. Just confess.
Now I'm suddenly very emotional and weak and invested in you.
Given a salve to alleviate the pain.
Sure.
We also find out that the king's on his deathbed, and 2-year-old Isabella is preggo and playing the long game as well of haha, I know exactly why they fucking did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's using the king's strategy against him, because the king's strategy was to breed the Scots out of Scotland, and she's breeding his line out with the Scots.
This is true. However,
I hate this.
However, her logic is flawed here. So she whispers creepily in Syphilis Leprosy Man's ear.
It's not Syphilis Leprosy, it's King Edward.
Yeah.
Could be syphilis, though.
Yeah, that guy. She whispers, like, your line ends because I've got the Scotsman growing in me or whatever, right? Sure, you're going to have one Scottish child. That man's going to die soon. So unless you're planning on bringing in more Scottish people, there is potential for not illegitimate children to be born. I don't know if you've thought this plan through all the way, unless, much like the rest of medieval Europe at the time, you plan on dying in childbirth.
Yeah.
In which case, this feels like a bad plan.
It is very much so. Because it's going to be raised like it's the king's
I
or
was
the
going to say, it
prince's
doesn't
son.
really matter if it's Scottish or not. If you're raised an Englishman, how would you know?
It's like that clip of the boy who was born, the white boy who has lived in China, and he has a Chinese accent because he's
Chinese.
Well, China was his first language.
Yeah.
But it is execution time.
Which, I mean, as someone who's a fan of gory horror, I was a little disappointed here. Because again, I had forgotten this was an R-rated movie. And so I was kind of excited when I was reminded that this was R-rated. I was like, oh, the torture scene must be much more gruesome than I remember. It is not.
No. I do like the hamming it up with the little people.
Oh, I do too. I think that is, medieval humor on point.
Yeah. Wallace just has the strength to die well, tortured to the end, never giving up, long and drawn out, but actually they had to tone it down probably for censorship.
Yeah.
As he was executed as a to be executed as a traitor, you were hanged, disemboweled, beheaded, and then quartered.
Yes, and I think the actual guy had his limbs shipped all over Scotland as warnings.
No, they were shipped to the four corners of England, so that way they couldn't be recovered.
There you go. So,
Yeah.
then you don't even get to be buried properly.
Yeah.
I do appreciate Mel Gibson's effort that he put in here to really embody Wallace, as he did accidentally hang himself.
Yes, the second movie we've talked about where someone's accidentally hung themselves.
Again, I feel like this shouldn't need to come with a warning, but if you are potentially thinking about being an actor and doing a scene in which your character must be hung, hanging is a way that people die, and you should be very careful.
Yeah. And make sure the stunt guy doesn't know the proper way to hang someone, because there is a proper way.
Yes. Luckily, he was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a little bit funny. Just a little bit funny.
But in the end, Wallace turns the crowd around as he yells freedom and sees his dead wife.
Again, who comes whispering to him through the crowd. So he clearly still is very much in love with said dead wife.
Mm-hmm.
So what was his plan with French English lady? Because
one last row before.
Because as far as this movie has led us to believe, he was so in love with this dead woman that he went to war and then let himself be captured and tortured.
Seduced by that French
freedom.
Vagina magic.
God damn it!
Yeah, it's...
I mean, don't get me wrong. It's very moving. Hearing him yell freedom, especially, I can see how, in a movie theater setting, that would be powerful if you don't think too much about it.
Yeah, just a bit.
I do like how his two buddies are standing there like Robin Hood style in the audience watching him be hung.
Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, it's a good moment, but it doesn't really...
It doesn't add anything.
It doesn't add anything. It doesn't build up from anywhere either is the issue.
No.
That's the thing is,
we could have ended the movie, before he got captured, and, that would have been honestly more, compelling.
Yeah, the other thing I don't like about this scene, too, is Gibson mentioned that his death paralleled Christ's death in this movie. And
Okay.
it's just like, it's a little bit self-masturbatory.
That is another thing that has come about with our new introduction into the Mel Gibson world. Mel Gibson is a self-proclaimed, very heavy-handed evangelical. And at the time of this movie, was kind of sort of the closeted, overly zealous Christian.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't quite fully emerged as the crazy man that we all know him as today. And so he would attempt to find Christ imagery in places that it had no fucking business being, like Braveheart.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it working with, like, the quartering. I mean, that...
Okay, that's just torture. That's just two dudes who both got tortured. You can't be like, yes, because he yelled freedom, he is like Christ. No, he's really not. Christ had...
Scottish Jesus.
Okay, Christ had a long-ass time to have a full-blown conversation with the two dudes hanging up there with him. He had so long, in fact, that the Romans got tired of him not dying and poked him. This is not the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the same thing. Good try, though, sir.
Maybe one day we'll do the Passion of the Christ.
Okay, that's gonna be a flashback, because, like, when I was doing research, that was one of the things, like, during his interview, I was like, oh, shit, this is the same man who was in Passion of the Christ.
Or directed
Passion of the Christ. And as someone who grew up in a mega church, like, amongst people who fall into the exact same level of evangelical as him, there were people who were, like, purposely bringing their 6, 8, 10-year-olds to the Passion of the Christ, which is just as gory and tit-filled as this movie. But they would have thrown a fit about this movie.
Yeah.
So, like, that is the mindset of the man who directed this film. Is, like, that's the level of, like, thought process that's going in. So, like, that's why some of this no longer makes sense to me. That's why I think this movie no longer holds that, like, oh, wow, that was a great movie. Because now I see it through, like, where he was coming from, and I'm like, oh, no, honey, this was meant to be history. This isn't just, like, Scottish Jesus. He was never meant to be Scottish Jesus. Is that why he has long hair in this film, Mel Gibson? Is that why this man looks dirty and has long hair?
Well, I like you bring that up because no one knows what walls actually look like.
No, but he probably had short-cut hair like everyone else in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, well... Look,
long hair wasn't really in fashion at the time.
I don't know nothing about it.
Honestly, the Karen cut without the layers was kind of the man. Like, a nice little bob, you know, cookies and cream, berries and cream man.
Berries and cream.
Honestly, he's pretty historically accurate. He's more historically accurate than this. Honestly, Wallace probably looked more like that.
So that's the thing. I can take the historic, like...
Oh, I can throw it out the window.
Yeah.
But this movie doesn't give much effort for that.
No.
Like, Princess Bride is, like, quote-unquote historical, but, like, it's not based on any real events. It's so fanciful that, like, I don't know when any of this is, so the fact that none of the costumes line up doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that nobody's hair matches. Doesn't matter that, like, the castle makes no sense. Because it's just fantasy.
Yeah.
This movie, though, spends so much time and effort being like, don't you remember the history? Don't you remember how much you love this?
Yeah,
and it's like, no, just let it be legend. Let it be fake.
Yeah, and I'll talk about a little bit about that in the end of it. So, okay. After the execution, we cut to another battle and epilogue where his head's on... Well, real quick before that. His head was actually displayed on the London Bridge, and his limbs were taken to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Which,
you know, don't let this, like, sound too exciting. London Bridge had a lot of heads on it. Like, he wasn't just the only guy.
Yeah.
It was covered in dead.
And Bruce is now leading. You bled with Wallace, now bleed with me.
Solid line. It sounded cool.
Which, they did get it right. Bruce the next year did lead a rebellion that would end up leading to the freedom of Scotland in 1328.
Yeah, the time doesn't line up, but, like, I mean, the film looked good.
Yeah.
Like, kind of.
Close with a lone sword in the ground, which...
The flinging of the sword. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about the flinging of the great sword?
So, not probably feasible, because that shit's heavy.
It is heavy.
Also not the right sword, because I've been to... I'll get into that at the end.
I like the imagery of, like, the final shot being of the great sword with the, like, scrap of kilt tied to the handle.
Yeah.
I don't love the slow motion fling through the air.
Yeah.
Because, like, there's a lot of moments where Mel Gibson... Exactly. He tried to use slow motion and zooms to, like, help with storytelling and narrative, which good on him for, like, trying that. I don't think he was super successful all the time, but, like, sometimes he was. There were moments that worked.
Yeah.
This is not one of them. This feels weird.
No, I think probably it's heavily inspired by part of the end of Seven Samurai, where their swords are in their graves.
Yeah, and, like...
So, like, I can see that influence here, but... And,
like, the imagery's cool. I just don't care for, like... how we got to the still.
You would have been fine with if it was just, if, like, I think you probably would have been more fine if he had planted a sword in the ground and then they, like, kind of faded out or something, or even if they charged into battle or something.
Yeah, literally anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, like, the weirdest, like, I don't because, like, again, this is, like, right before a battle. So just, like, imagine you're, like, about to fight and some guy just, like, long throws a great axe into the middle of the field and everyone's like, yeah, Wallace!
Yeah, that's true.
It's a little strange.
Yeah, so, Braveheart.
That was Braveheart.
So, and I'm going to do this for kind of our next couple episodes. Well, at least this one and the next one. Because compared to Kell's approach to fiction compared to Braveheart, I think part of it is because we can deal with... There's vagueness in both of them, but one's so much further back than the other. Where Kells deals with a fictional item that no one knows the history about.
Okay.
Whereas Braveheart takes clear history and shoves it willy-nilly in for entertainment.
That is true.
I mean, Gibson even said that they used creative writing and they took artistic license and hyped it. And he elaborated where he could. It's like, that's good for... that's great for making a movie.
Sure. But, like, why would you... not try to portray that from the get-go? Be like, hey, this is a fantasy, as opposed to, like, what this was advertised as, portrayed as, and then honestly a lot of people watched fully believing that this was based off of historical events that were just, like, slightly elaborated. Yeah.
Well, and on top of that, so, like, I think the other thing that annoys me is how open they are with their leniencies of, like, oh yeah, that was wrong. Yep, that was wrong. That was wrong.
And, like, we've talked about how we've covered directors who go over the top to try and be precise. And those movies turn out amazing. I mean, Titanic is a grand example of, like, going over the top for
fictional
detail.
Story on a historic background. And that's generally where those types of movies do better, is because you're not taking real... Well, it has controversy too, but...
But, like, honestly, like, that... Like, I think also the thing that gets my goat, and it gets a lot of history buff people's goats with Braveheart, is a lot of people saw it and then were inspired to understand more. They, like, connected with this story, which is great, because a lot of the, like, hope and, like, desire behind watching a historical piece is, like, that you want to learn more about that topic, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately with Braveheart, the way it's portrayed, it leaves no open questions for anyone to go research on their own. So you're just kind of left assuming you know the story.
Well, and on top of that, so here's the thing why I understand to take biopics with a grain of salt.
Oh, sure, always.
But the reason I decided specifically to shit on this movie's history so much is because the writer Wallace did most of his research after writing.
Which is the stupidest way to do something.
Yeah. And, like, I applaud his approach of wanting to create a timeless piece rather than a history lesson. And he did a great job with that. He did succeed in that.
He did.
But he wrote what inspired him, and it was more of a spiritual experience for him. So I think that's where it falls apart is instead of like putting a disclaimer of like some history is inaccurate.
Or even just changing the names of people.
Yeah. Or
just put random names on people.
Make a story inspired by William Wallace instead of a story about William Wallace, whose entire story takes place in a year time frame.
Yeah.
And then disappears for 6 years.
Honestly, use those 6 years that he's gone. Like,
yeah.
We don't know what he did. We don't know what he was up to. Make something up. No one can tell you no.
Yeah, we exactly. That's the thing is like that's where you should have taken the creative liberty. And I mean, granted, he did take creative liberty from his childhood because there's not a lot of history on that.
Sure, and honestly, the childhood part was the best part of this movie, to be honest. Like, it was the most compelling emotionally, storytelling, it made the most sense, and symbolistic-wise, it had the most impact.
Yeah, it won like 5 out of its 9 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and Director.
Which is interesting because a lot of people have brought up over the years how this movie went up against quite the, like, lineup that year. And it was impactful for a lot of people, but a lot of people think it won because of hype and less on, like, actually being the great, like, the best of that category.
Yeah, let's see what it was up for Best Picture.
I think Apollo 13 was also in the running.
Apollo 13, Babe. Babe was up for Best Picture? What the fuck?
Okay, Babe's filmography for the time period, pretty damn good.
I am actually kind of floored by that.
Well, eventually we will have to look into Babe. I don't know if we will cover Babe. However, Apollo 13, you cannot tell me that Apollo 13 is not the better historical fiction than this.
I don't think I've seen Apollo 13. Let me finish.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen it since middle school.
That's fair.
Because I know it was either our science or history class we had to watch it as, like, substitute day.
Yeah, okay, so Apollo 13 also has the same problem of, like, portraying a historical event, but elaborating quite a lot to make it a, like, fun and entertaining. However, the facts, like, the bare-bone facts of the Apollo 13 movie are correct.
Okay.
Like, and honestly, I think it's a better film in general. I think the costuming's better, the setting's better, the effects are better. But, you know, Braveheart was more popular.
I can see that. And to be fair, it's a good work of fiction. Also to note, since we've already going down this, The Postman and Sense and Sensibility were also up for Best Pictures. Best Director, Babe, Dead Man Walking, Leaving Las Vegas, and The Postman, which I didn't realize Nick Cage won Best Oscar or Best Actor
Good for him.
Leaving Las Vegas.
I also didn't realize that, but, you know, good for him.
Yeah.
The man puts out so much movies, he might as well win something for something.
Yeah. And, I mean, as much as we give shit for the director as well on this, I mean, the fascination and romanticization with Wallace dates back to the 15th century with Harry the Minstrel, or Blind Harry, I think his name.
Blind Harry.
Yeah. And...
yeah, he wrote, like, a weird poem that was, like, very loosely, like, kind of rolling a lot of people into one, all claiming them Wallace.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay.
Oh, yeah, no, like, we've always been entertained. Like, Joan of Arc had the same problem.
Mm-hmm. And from a Screen Rant article I was reading, they got the sword even wrong.
Of course.
Inspired by Wallace's sword, that's on display in the National Wallace Monument in Sterling, which I'll accept. That
okay.
I can see that as like, okay, well, that's the sword on display. That's what it's used.
And, like, it's a very iconic shaped sword, especially for a movie that, again, not a lot of detail ever. So, like, you kind of got to go with big overall shapes, and the swords of the day were not as exciting as a broadsword.
Yeah, and as historian David Caldwell told BBC, the so-called Wallace sword is actually a type of Scottish sword that dates to the late 16th century. The sword was seen at Dumbarton Castle by the famous poet William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy when they toured Scotland in 1803. One of the soldiers in the garrison told them it was Wallace's. This is the first time the sword is known to have been associated with the Scottish hero. And they also mentioned was the soldier deliberately telling a tale to these English visitors.
Maybe also, like, I've worked at, like, places where you have tourists. Sometimes people just say stuff, man.
Yeah.
Like, Why not? The guy probably thought it.
Yeah. And not surprisingly either. I mean, this is kind of the start of, or earlier days, or heydays of home video.
Yeah.
Where Braveheart did better on home video than it did in theaters, too.
That it did, which is surprising because we watched the special edition release DVD copy, and it had a few things to go with it. It had a whole second disc, which is kind of impressive. Honestly, not the best.
No.
Like, for something that did so much better on home release, for something that had so much fan behind it, for something that Mel Gibson has said, like, he put so much work and effort and thought into, it's not a lot to show for it.
Well,
as far as, like, home released media, there wasn't a lot of other stuff to go with it either. Like, there was a second one made. I don't remember anyone watching or talking about it.
Was there a second one?
There was.
Huh.
It was called Robert the Bruce. It was released in 2019. It was very limited release.
Braveheart 2: Lions of the North. Oh, it's still in development.
Okay. They're, like, perhaps a spiritual successor then. Like, for something that, like, people loved as much as they said they did, there's just not a lot to go with it.
Oh, there's a movie called Robert the Bruce.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
It's, again, for a movie that people absolutely loved, there wasn't a whole lot, like, with the exception of the music, which went on to be phenomenal and well received. There wasn't, like, a ton of posters sold. There wasn't a whole lot of secondary media sold. There wasn't a book adaptation that was really well received. It was just kind of like one and done.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check this out. I'm actually very curious
about Robert the Bruce movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, which, I mean, a lot of people really loved this movie, and 2019 wasn't that long ago. I don't remember anyone talking about this.
It's also Angus McFadden who played the young Bruce.
Yeah, so, like, theoretically good. But again, like, for something that so many people said was so impactful and, like, really inspiring, doesn't seem to be a whole lot that came out of it. Which is kind of disappointing. Like, there could have been more. There could have been a lot more.
Well, I think they did that to avoid the actual history of it.
That's true.
So I think it's hard. It's been out so long and everyone knows the history so bad that they can't really, like, do anything without really diving into it.
I will say, though, there was one very clear big piece that came out of this, other than the tourism boom to Scotland, there was a very horrendous statue put up in 1997, I think.
Is it a Mel Gibson's Braveheart?
It sure fucking is. It's a limestone statue in Scotland. I think it was just outside the Stirling. The townsfolk really did not like it. They thought it was kind of a bad take. They weren't impressed with the film. Yeah, there he is.
Oh my god, that thing is awful.
Oh, it's really bad. It was bad enough to the point that someone later on came in with some tools in the night and chiseled off his face. Later on, the artist came back. I believe the artist was actually an American man as well, not even a Scottish guy. And this is in Scotland, remember.
This is beautiful.
Oh, it's real bad. So he came back, fixed the face, and then they put iron bars around him after that to protect him from vandalism because the locals hated it so much. Which then people hated even more because it implied that Wallace was in prison. I think and later on, in 2008, I think, he was eventually removed and brought back to America where he belongs, honestly. Look at it. And I think that has appeased the town. I haven't heard I couldn't find anything else from anyone saying anything. And all of the interviews and talks with actual Scottish people, all of them were like, yeah, we're glad people are interested, but, like, this isn't a really great, like, we're not impressed with the movie. So, like, I don't know. clearly there is, like, a hunger for this sort of movie, right?
Yeah.
So, like, why A, not make more of this style with, you know, big name actors and actresses having the Braveheart styling, but for Americans' audience. But they didn't really do that. They just kind of, like, one and done and called it a day.
It's still in Scotland. It's
I'm so fucking sorry, guys.
Glebe Park Stadium.
Well, it's at least no longer, like, offending the town.
Brecon.
Yeah, at least it's no longer offending the town. Yeah, it's a really ugly statue.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what, as a movie, ignoring the historical facts, as a piece of entertainment and fiction,
okay,
what do you rate Braveheart?
Because we only have 3 ratings, good, bad, and weird, I will rate it good, but it's really more like fine.
Yeah.
Like, I will watch it. It is entertaining. I do not love it. I was not, like, overly moved by it. There were multiple lines that I thought were good. I honestly don't remember most of them, and I watched this last night.
Yeah. I want to say it's good, because from a storytelling narrative, a good chunk of it is good.
Yeah, like, a good chunk is good. And if I say good to other stuff, this is also fine.
Yeah, it all, but rewatching it and re-examining it, especially much older,
yeah,
there's so much potential that I think is overlooked as we get buried in a bunch of, like, little subplots that are just
useless.
Here's a little tidbit of information, here's a tidbit of information, but they never actually, like, lead into each other. It just...
Yeah. Well, and, like, we've also, like, just come out of a time where historical fantasy and even, like, more based in true facts has become very popular. Like, there's a huge interest in not necessarily Scottish, but just, like, historical drama in general, right? So I think I would be interested in seeing a remake of this. Maybe not this exact story, but a new version with Wallace. Like,
yeah,
a new story of William Wallace, a new telling, new cast. But, like, the story is good.
Well, I think the issue with that is, if you try and keep it historic, all it is, like, two major battles and 3 little skirmishes.
Look, if Bridgerton can be as popular as it is, this movie can be better.
True. So, would you recommend this movie?
Sure. I mean, not highly. It's fine.
I do still think it's worth a watch. I don't suggest going into the history of it unless you really want to, but go into it knowing that it's not historically accurate from the get-go.
Let me rephrase. If you were one of those people who thought this movie was, like, the bee's fucking knees back in the day when it came out, go rewatch it. It is worth a rewatch in your older, much more wiser years. AKA not as a kid.
Yeah.
But if it's, like, your first time and you've never seen Braveheart, I don't know, put it, like, 3rd or 4th on your list of things to do.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty low in my opinion as well. Like, I mean, it's worth at least one watch in your lifetime.
Yeah, eventually get around to it, but, like, if you're in the mood for a Scottish movie, there's so many that are much better. If you're interested in a historical war, there's so many that are much better. If you're honestly interested, for some godforsaken reason, in a Mel Gibson movie, there are so many that are much better. So, like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe watch it if it's on.
At least for the freedom speech.
Yeah, there are parts that are good.
Yeah.
They just, unfortunately, are not the whole movie.
Exactly. So, anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace and freedom! Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com.
And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, The Bad, and The Weird podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.